Welcome to Will at Work. I'm Kevin. Today we're looking at the Cassette Vision Jr, but basically the Cassette Vision. If you're not familiar, that's okay. This was a system that was released in Japan, and it is probably either unique or one of two that I'm aware of that work this way, which I will explain in a moment. We've looked at Pong systems. This is not a Pong system, but we've looked at Pong systems in the past, and most of those in the early 70s and through the mid 70s were standalone units. We've looked at a lot of those. So they were, they would have a selection of games built into them, mostly Pong variants, but some had some race cars, some biking, gun shooting, etc. And they were very crude graphics, right? That slowly got better over the course of the decade. Things moved a lot slower back then, but that's just how it was. And then near the time of like when Atari 2600 was just about to come out in 1978, we started to see some consoles that took cartridges, and they would have the microprocessor on the cartridge, and this allowed them to basically have a variety of different games, but not have to change out the base unit. Basically, General Instruments, the company, was the one making the microchips that would be used in these cartridges, and for the most part, the variety was the same as most other. It was all Pong, at Stunt Cycle, shooting games sometimes, or racing, and the same stuff we saw in different variants of the different Pong systems, because they were basically the General Instruments chips that you could either put into a standalone console or in the later units on a cartridge. Now, what makes this particular system unique is that what happens later, as we all know, is that they eventually put processors onto the main console, and then the cartridges themselves just contain software programs that allow you to play the game on the cartridge, and you end up with a lot more variations, and the cartridges cost less money, at least they should. So, and that's what your Atari 28 or 2600, Intellivision, ColecoVision, Nintendo Entertainment System, and on adopted that type of format. Now, that's not to say that down the road there weren't extra microchips put on cartridges in order to improve processing and that sort of thing, but the idea of just the dumb console with the dedicated processor on the cartridge didn't last very long. At most, I think it lasted 2 years, and it was quickly surpassed by ROM cart systems. Now, why I say this is unique is that basically you have a body, right, of the Cassette Vision or the Cassette Vision Jr, which is this, and you have cartridges. And the cartridges do contain the processor, so the base unit is dumb in a sense. It only has I believe it has a display processor, likely, a display chip. I don't even call it a processor. And it probably has a little bit of RAM, like 2K of RAM or something, but everything else would be contained on the cartridge. And they would use, I don't know if they use General Instruments chips, but they would use similar processors like we've seen on the other game systems that take the cartridge. But what's different about the Cassette Vision is that they also had an NEC chip that was sort of an all-in-one programmable ROM chip. And so they would put that on a cartridge, and then they would put in, you know, software. They would write the ROM, you know, the game into the software, so that, you know, you had variations of different games, and you know, so it was sort of a hybrid system. It was the sort of the Pong on a cartridge, as I like to call it, and then ROM cart. But in essence, you know, that ROM cart had the whole processor, RAM, and everything else on it in order to run the game that they put on there. No other system I'm aware of, except maybe one, which we'll look at in the future, did this same thing. So it was very unique, and it's the only hybrid system that I'm aware of. So this, you know, really deserves a bigger footnote in the history of video gaming that people don't necessarily equate. Now, this came out at a time when I think it was just before the Cassette Vision did, just before NES, and it did okay in Japan, right? And then they ended up releasing the Super Cassette Vision, which we'll look at later, which was a more traditional system that, you know, were going up against the NES. But the Cassette Vision Jr. was sort of this stopgap, right? So the normal Cassette Vision, again, it's just a dumb console. It doesn't have like a processor in it, you know what I mean? But it had control knobs on the base unit, you know, for left and right and up and down, and they were built into the case. So they, you know, these dials, kind of like Pong, but they were like kind of big. And there was another player on the other side and some buttons. And you would sit there and you would play the games on the base unit by turning these dials up and down. So what they did, because there's no controllers, so what they did here with the Cassette Vision Jr. is they added this left and right toggle here, and then they gave you this kind of 4-button, you know, control, so that, you know, you could play the games a bit more like a traditional type game system, right? You know, I wasn't playing this back in the day. It wasn't from Japan. I had no idea this thing even existed back then, so I couldn't tell you how the experience went. But we can certainly take a look at this, you know, and we can try it out. We can see if we can get a display out of it. Well, let me take it out of the box here. Okay. Put that over there. So, you know, we've got our base unit here, right, and a power adapter. It's out of there. Manual and registration card. And, you know, some of the games on the back here. Yosaku. There was a version of Galaxian. Let's see if I can get that in focus for you a little bit. Battle Vader, some variant of Space Invaders undoubtedly. Pak-Pak Monster, which I have and we'll look at. Monster Mansion, and Astro Command. So I think that may be all the games that were released for it, but again, it didn't do that bad. Now I will show you one of the games. They came in these cassette tape type boxes, but it's not a tape, it's, you know, it's a game. And in Japan, from what I understand, they do not call their games, even to this day, cartridges. They still call them cassettes. But this followed a more traditional cassette type structure, right? It has this sort of swinging door here, and then you have the game cart itself. It has a little bit of instructions, and you can kind of see here, this is a traditional picture of a Cassette Vision. So you have these big dials on the left and right, and then you had some buttons on both sides for 2-player. Well, the Junior was more a single-player unit. And so, you know, pop the cartridge in. I don't think you can put it in backwards. Oh, you can. Good job. And back here, there's a vent for heat from the processor that would be in here cooking. Now this game undoubtedly was one of the NEC chip ones, programmable ROM, and based off the picture, I know that the sticker goes forward. Now, one thing I read online is that the graphical capability of this early NEC chip that was used in the Cassette Vision was really weak. And so it had big blocky graphics, which we'll see in a minute. And but if you were to use one of the General Instruments chips, like the Stunt Cycle, or maybe the Tank game they had, or Drag Racing, or just generally Pong, it would actually have better graphics, because they were doing more like very precise programming of what they wanted on those chips, and so they could make the graphics tighter and smaller, and with color and overall look better, versus what the limitations were of this particular programmable microprocessor of the time. And these guys weren't alone. I mean, the Atari 2600, as popular as it was, and the amazing games that they managed to program on that thing, it was really barely able. You barely could program anything on it. There's great videos out there about how difficult it was to program the Atari 2600, and there was some miracle work to get a lot of those games to come about. And obviously, like all things, once you start doing it, it probably became easier when you understood it and understood the limitations. But these guys were trailblazing back then. They were trying to take things out of arcades that had very sort of specific designs, around whatever hardware they wanted to throw at it, because the arcades were money makers back then, and so they could afford to put in the RAM and the processing and lots of color and all of these things, tighter graphics and stuff. And when they tried to translate a lot of those games to the home, they didn't look that good. It took a lot longer. It took basically to the ColecoVision or NES to basically get a serviceable arcade-like experience, I would say. But the 2600, as well as the Intellivision, did a bang-up job of at least giving everybody a fun gaming experience with their weak systems. So anyway, Cassette Vision even weaker because it doesn't have anything on it. I always think it'd be kind of funny, like with one of these or one of those Pong ones with the General Instruments chip on there. Like if you were to maybe get an EEPROM burner or something and burn like a chip and put it into one of these things, and maybe put in like a great game or something, or something like really amazing that this thing would never have been able to do before. I know that the display processor, it couldn't handle it, but it would still be kind of funny. So this is basically your standard Japanese manual. There's some stuff about the switch box on here, and this will be one of those usual channel 95. Now I will tell you a little bit of a story with this. I had done a video about this earlier, and I was not able to get a display, and the reason why was because I did not know about the whole channel 95 thing with Japanese game systems. This was my first introduction, not to Japanese systems, but my first introduction to RF and trying to get a television signal out. So I had just I had futzed with it a lot, and I had gotten some fuzzy signals on some other channels, but I was unable to get a good quality signal, so I ended up just making the video as is and showing that it worked, but that it was in need of repair. But now that I know that we can get this on a proper television channel, I may still have to open it back up and retune it, because I was messing with it a lot initially. But yeah, and we can go ahead and see what we get. Now the Cassette Vision Jr, in terms of collectible, this one's a little bit more rare than the Cassette Vision itself. You can find Cassette Visions on eBay, pretty common on there. They're not that expensive. You could probably collect all the games and a system and maybe not even spend $1,000 for all of it. Maybe not even spend $500 for all of it, if you're lucky. But some of the games, it all depends on the seller and all that kind of thing. But it's a fairly quiet system in terms of collectors. A lot of people just don't seem that interested in getting the Cassette Vision for whatever reason. I think, you know, it comes down to popularity and that sort of thing. And if they've never heard of it, then they generally don't try and collect it. They're trying to collect more of the commercially successful systems and such. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty cool. So I'm going to switch it over to the video side, and let's see what kind of a picture we can get. And let's take a look at this Pak-Pak monster. And I'll try to play with this toggle switch and 4 buttons here. And select, start, and you know, we got our power on off, and we'll see what we get. Here we go. So we're looking at the Cassette Vision Jr. So yeah, I was able to get a display out of it on channel 95 as expected. Unfortunately, the sound is on channel 3 or something, which is all staticky. But it's one of those things where you're trying to get these RF signals in, and in this case, the sound doesn't line up with the video. But here you can kind of get a look at the video signal is pretty clean. Otherwise, you know, there's a little bit of ghosting there, but it's not too bad. And you know, you can kind of see that this is sort of a Pac-Man variant, although the ghosts tend to be really dumb. Like, they're just kind of following a pattern that's really basic, and you could easily outsmart them and do really well at this game if you wanted to. But you know, it just gives you a rather simple look at very early days type of gaming here with the a system that, you know, was less than a Atari 2600, let's say, but did have the unique ability to play processor on chip games as well as these programmable ROMs. Unique. So yeah, Cassette Vision Jr. It works. It's a keeper. We'll just add it to the collection. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.